All right, let me take you back to 1968 in Mexico City. The world is watching, the Olympic Games are in full swing, and among the athletes is a young long jumper named Bob Beeman. Now, Bob is not just another athlete, he's fast, he's powerful, and he's expected to dominate, basically. But Bob had one problem. See, in long jump, there's a takeoff board. If you step beyond it, your jump is disqualified. Well, Bob, he had developed a bad habit of overstepping. In fact, leading up to the Olympics, he had been fouling out of competitions. Now, fast forward to the Olympic finals. Bob gets up for the first attempt and fouls. He goes again on the second attempt, and another foul. And suddenly, reality hits him. One more foul and he's out of the Olympics. No gold medal, no shot at the world record. Now, this is the moment right here. This is where most people break under pressure. They let failure define them. They let past mistakes convince they'll fail again. But Bob, he refused to let that happen. Instead of panicking, he recentered himself, he visualized success, he took a deep breath, adjusted his approach, and on his next jump, he didn't just win the gold medal, he destroyed the world record. How badly? His jump was so far beyond what anyone had done that the Olympics official measuring equipment didn't go far enough to measure it. They had to go bring in new tools to confirm what had just happened. Bob Beeman had just shattered the world record by almost 2 feet, a record that stood unbroken for nearly 23 years. So why am I telling you this story? Well, because today's episode is the power of failure. Bob Beeman could have let those failed jumps define him. He could have crumbled under the weight of past mistakes, but instead, he saw failure as a lesson, not a label. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Failure is not the opposite of success. It's actually the foundation of it. Before we dive in, real quick, if you're enjoying this conversation and want to go deeper into leadership, my book, The Leadership Code, Future-Proof Your Impact, is now available on Amazon. You can grab it in Kindle, paperback, or hard copy. Also, make sure to follow this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcast. Hit that follow button so you don't miss future episodes. All right, let's get back into it. Now, let's start with something most people get wrong about failure. Just before that, my name is Jose Navarro, and this is the Leadership Code podcast. So most people think of failure as the end of the road, as proof that, they're not good enough. But in reality, failure is feedback. Think about it. When a baby is learning to walk, they fall over and over again. Just like us, when we're learning how to ride a bike, we fall off the bike, we get those bruised knees. And do we stop trying? No, because failure is part of the process. But somewhere along the way, as we grow up, we stop seeing failure as learning and start seeing it as basically proof that we should quit. And that is a big mistake. James Dyson and his 5,126 failures. So let me hit you with a really wild example. If you don't know who James Dyson is, he was a guy who invented the famous Dyson vacuum. He created 5,126 failed prototypes before he got it right. Yeah, 5,126 times. You heard me correctly. Now, anyone could have given up, but instead, he treated each failure as feedback, a clue to what wasn't working. And when he finally got it right, the vacuum made him a billionaire. Now, the deep question here is, how many times have you given up on something after just one or two failures? Failure is not proof you should quit, it's proof that you're in the learning phase. Now, obviously, there is an emotional impact of failure. And sometimes we ask ourselves, why does it feel so heavy? Right? So let's talk a little bit about failure and why it feels so personal. So failure hits hard because it taps into our deepest fears. The fear of not being good enough, the fear of being judged, the fear of wasting time. And when we fail, it's easy to fall into negative self-talk. Maybe I'm just not meant for this, or maybe I should just quit. All these negative things, right? But failure only carries the weight we give it. And sometimes failure is the best thing that can happen to us, right? Even when it comes, or even when it does feel like it at times. So let me give you a really cool example. So some of you probably already know who Sylvester Stallone is. So there's a story that's called the rejected screenplay that changed Hollywood. So most people don't know this, but before Sylvester Stallone became a household name, he was completely broke. He had less than $50 in his bank account, and things were so bad that he had to sell his dog just to afford food. So, Stallone wasn't just trying to be an actor, he was also a screenwriter. And one day, he wrote a script called Rocky, the story of a struggling boxer given one shot at greatness. Now, Stallone believed in his script and everything he had. He knew it. He knew it was special. So basically, he started to pitch it to Hollywood studios. And guess what? Every single one of them rejected it. Not just once, but over 1,500 times. Studios told him, "Oh, I'm sorry, but no, the story is too predictable. Nobody wants to see a movie about boxing, really. You're not a leading man. Come on, be real." They didn't just reject his script, they rejected him. But Stallone refused to give up. So one day, a studio finally offered to buy Rocky for about $125,000. Now, for that time, that was a lot of money. But there was a catch. They didn't want him to play the lead role. They wanted a different actor. Now, Stallone stood his ground. He believed that if anyone else played Rocky, the story wouldn't work. So even though he was dirt poor, had no job, and had just sold his dog, he walked away from that deal. Can you imagine, like, your first gig, like your script, your baby, and you have no money at all, and somebody says, "Okay, we'll pay you $125,000." What would you do? Would you take it, or would you do what Rocky did? So his persistence actually paid off. So the studio eventually caved and let him star in it. Rocky was made on a shoestring budget of about $1 million, and it ended up making over 225 million worldwide. Not only that, but the movie won 3 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. And Stallone, well, he became one of the biggest action stars in history. So, how do we actually overcome failure? So, there's a 4-step method that I want to share. So, step 1, feel it, but don't dwell. It's okay to be frustrated, but set a time limit for self-pity. An example of Michael Jordan used every failure as fuel. When he was cut off from his high school basketball team, he didn't just sink and fail. He trained even harder. Step 2, look for the lesson. Every failure teaches you something. Ask yourself, okay, what went wrong? What can I do differently next time? Thomas Edison's famous quote, "I have not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." So every time that we have a project that we want to do something in life and it doesn't go our way, it's just, you just found how not to do things. Just like the bike, when when you fell, you learn that you need to improve your balance, right? So you go step by step. Step 3, talk about it. Failure feels less overwhelming when you share it. So find a mentor, a friend, or a support group. A while back, I went through kind of a similar process. I applied for a different role. Obviously, it was higher up in the scale. But at that moment, I did not know how to deal with failure. I didn't know about these 4 steps, right? And it got me into trouble that I was almost fired. I was about to leave the company because I was letting failure basically take over of who I was. And something that really helped me a lot was to talk about my emotions. That was something that really impacted me and affected me negatively on my professional journey, right? So one thing that did help me go through this process was to find the right people, find a mentor, my leaders that, had gone through something similar and basically walked me through it and let me see that I wasn't alone, that I had the support from them and that there were different ways and pathways towards success, but again, for me, this was something very new. And I'll share this story on a different episode, but I think that when we're going through these or through this emotional stage, because it does impact our emotions, these 4 steps that I'm talking about, I think are the steps that we need to follow in order to overcome failure and what that will lead into, right? Which is most of the times a lot of trouble. So the last step is try again, but smarter. Don't just repeat the same mistake, adjust, improve, and try it again. Elon Musk's first 3 rocket launches failed so bad. They exploded, some didn't even launch, but on the 4th attempt, he made history. So let's bring this to a close. So remember Bob Beamon, the athlete that we spoke about at the beginning of the episode. One more failed jump and his Olympic dreams would have been over. Instead of letting failure define him, he used it as fuel. And that's what made him legendary. So the takeaway is that failure isn't final. Quitting is. Failure, or every failure, carries a lesson. Always remember that. And the greatest successes come from the biggest setbacks. So here's what I want you to take away today. Failure is feedback, not a final verdict. Rejection isn't the end. It's just proof that you're in the game, you're playing, you're there. And that's going to happen. It's going to hurt. You're going to lose a few games. But if you keep trying and if you keep improving your game, you'll get there. And the only way to truly fail is to stop trying. So next time that you're hit back with a setback, ask yourself these 3 things. What can I learn from this? How can I adjust? And how can I use this to get stronger? Because in the end, the people who succeed, they're not the ones who avoid failure. They're the ones who fail, learn, and keep going. So thanks for tuning in to the Leadership Code. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with a friend, leave a review, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll catch you next time. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Code podcast. Executive producer, Jose Navarro.